Ja chciałem zobaczyć, o to chciałem. Dawaj, zobaczymy sobie kawałek.
Many of you have heard of Jason Thor Hall, better known online as Pirate Software, due to all the surrounding drama related to Stop Killing Games. This video isn't about the Stop Killing Games drama. I do support the Stop Killing Games initiative, and anyone in the EU currently watching this should go and sign up to care about game preservation. This video is going to be a review of Jason's job history, game dev industry claims, coding ability, and his heartbound and champion of breakfast DRM solutions by me, a developer. I won't be touching on his hacking skills much in this video, since from what I found, all of his DEF CON wins were team efforts, and all of the stories related to hacking are just that, stories. Outside of his word, I generally can't find anything related to it. There isn't anything concrete or of substance in these stories for me to actually analyze and review. If anyone knows where he actually has hacking write-ups or knows the VODs where he actually does something related to hacking, let me know and I can do a separate video going through and reviewing it. Okay, with that out of the way, let's start with Jason's LinkedIn job history. So, if we look at his LinkedIn, we can see his first recorded job experience is from 2002 to 2009, where he was a freelance security researcher and developer. In 2002, Jason would have been 15, and from what I found, he hasn't taken any program classes, so anything he knows at this point is largely self-taught. Another important thing is Jason actually had a job in 2004 that isn't listed here as a quality assurance intern at Blizzard.
I went to Blizzard in 2004, and this is kind of my whole career, right? My first job I got through nepotism, 100%. My dad worked at Blizzard for 23 years. He worked at Blizzard for 23 years, so I got a job there in 2004. I was shit. I was shit at this, and I realized I was shit.
Also, I think it's important that we talk about his dad for a second. Jason says his dad just worked at Blizzard, but that's grossly understating his dad's role and history at Blizzard. Jason's dad is Joey Ray Hall, and from a Reddit AMA his dad held, we can see the following. Joey Ray joined Silicon and Synapses in 1991. Now, you might be asking what's Silicon and Synapses, and what does this have to do with Blizzard in his post? Well, in 1991, Blizzard didn't exist yet. Silicon and Synapses was the original company name, and 1991 was the year it was founded. Joey Ray joined Blizzard before it was Blizzard, and when he joined, there were less than 10 people in total at the company. He wasn't some random Blizzard employee. He was one of the earliest hires at the company. Over his 23 years, he did all sorts of work, and was the one that founded the cinematic team, led the machinima team, the video and post-production team, and the esports live broadcast team, plus being responsible for all the video content for every BlizzCon between 2005 to 2014. Plus, he led the team that made the famous South Park World of Warcraft episode, and the inspiration for the He Who Has No Life character. Joey Ray was the director of cinematics at Blizzard. He wasn't some low-level employee that worked at the company. He was pretty high up in the chain. Anyways, back to Jason.
The next 5 years,
Ale to filmowcem tam był.
I left Blizzard. I did not reapply. And I went and worked on my own. I did freelance. I did freelance for everything. So I actually went into Second Life, which is a 3D Worlds game, if you've never played it before. They have a language in it called Linden Scripting Language. And I made games in there. I learned how to do 3D modeling. I learned how to do texture work. I learned how to do scripting. I learned how to engage with people that were playing my games. I learned how to do network model stuff. I learned how to do server-related stuff. I did this for 5 whole years.
So Jason's Second Life period of time is a huge rabbit hole, and there's 5 or 6 different controversies surrounding his time in Second Life. This video isn't about his controversies and allegations, so I'm going to skip over most of it. The only small parts we care about are related to coding. During his Second Life playing time, he played a character known as Moldavia's Fig Tree and started a company called Dark Sphere Creations. He claims he did game program with the Linden scripting language, the programming language of Second Life, and made some small games and some user-generated content for Second Life. While digging into this, I didn't find any proof he coded any games. What Dark Sphere Creations and his company was actually doing at the time was creating not safe for work adult furry avatars and selling them. Basically, his friend Wingless Emo...
Ja pierdolę, jest furasy, to wszystko tłumaczyło, jak to się sprowadza do bycia furasem. To wszystko się teraz otwiera.
Another Second Life player would do the art and modeling for the furry avatars, and Jason would do some coding on top. What kind of coding he did on top of these avatars isn't exactly clear. Then
Ale
they
co
would
kodujesz w awatarach do chuja? Co tam kodował?
sell the avatars, and eventually the business was making somewhere around $10,000 a month, primarily due to selling these avatars. There's some other controversy where it alludes to Jason trying to do dev work on Linden Labs projects and other game worlds, but I can't find any solid proof, just random posts and accusations. So in summary, there doesn't seem to be any proof he did any kind of game development or hacking during this period of time. Let's get back to Jason.
Then I came back to Blizzard in 2009, and I applied. Not having his help in any way, I got the job.
Okay, the timeline here starts matching up with his LinkedIn. After his
To ciekawe brzmi, nie? Jak aplikujesz do firmy, w której pracuje twój stary i mówisz, że twój stary ci w tym nie pomagał.
little detour with Dark Sphere Creations and working for himself, Jason...
W której jeszcze twój stary ma wysoką pozycję.
now has an actual full-time job at Blizzard in 2009. This is his first official full-time job at Blizzard, and he is once again a quality assurance analyst. Jason claims he got into the company on his own merits this time, but I find that a bit hard to believe at face value. In 2004, he said he was terrible at his QA role, and that's why he quit. I searched to see if he studied anything IT related in high school or in college or during the time gap, and I found this from his subreddit. Jason did spend some time in college studying to be an entomologist with a specialization in ants. He dropped out of college without ever finishing his studies, and it doesn't seem like he ever took any IT related courses during this time here. During that 5-year gap between 2004 and 2009, the only experience he said in the clip from earlier was his Second Life programming, and well, that wasn't exactly quality assurance.
To też jest ciekawe, że w Blizzardzie bardzo często wymagało się, szczególnie w tamtych czasach, wykształcenia w danej dziedzinie. No, Blizzard Job Offers. Nawet teraz, nie? Zobaczmy, jakie są wymagania. Wejdźmy na jakiś Quality Assurance, dawaj, QA-ka. Dobra, wymaganie na Quality Assurance do Overwatcha, no nie? Test Manager. Zobaczmy. Minimum 8 lat w Quality Assurance, gdzie no wychodzi na to, że on nie miał żadnego doświadczenia, bo przez 5 lat sam sobie coś programował i coś robił, więc żadnego takiego typowo firmowego doświadczenia nie miał. Minimum 5 lat jako kontrybutor w ogóle w jakimś leadershipie, w teamach czy w czymś takim, no i znajomość, no nie? No i teraz patrzcie na to. High School Diploma or Equivalent Required. Normalnie, stary, musisz mieć bez kitu wykształcenie w tym. No i Bachelor Degree is Related Field Preferred, no nie? To jest ciekawe, bo mi się wydaje, że kiedyś oni zawsze wymagali, no nie? Ale to jest menadżer, no senior QA. Co mamy? Test Lead Senior, Test Director, Test Senior. No to nie mamy nic. Mamy seniora tylko. No ale za każdym razem w Blizzardzie faktycznie stary senior, test lead, senior. O patrz, designer po prostu do unannounced gierki, no nie? 13 lat doświadczenia, stary, no nie? A on nie miał żadnego doświadczenia, został zatrudniony w Blizzardzie. Tak po prostu. No nie, no Blizzard nie zatrudniał ludzi. Patrz, artysta po prostu do unannounced gierki, no nie? 5 lat doświadczenia. Doświadczenie w grach AAA, no. To jest najciekawsze tak naprawdę w tym wszystkim. Że to jest, został zatrudniony w Blizzardzie, bo jego stary tam pracował.
Hacking.
I to jest teraz, ale kiedyś to w Blizzardzie zawsze trzeba było mieć wykształcenie w ogóle w danej dziedzinie. To się teraz
or game development work. Plus, while applying in 2009, on his resume he would probably have had, or Blizzard itself would have had a record he worked there previously as a QA. So that would make applying a second time for a similar position easier. His dad, once again, was a pretty high person in the company, and some people might remember Jason being Joey Ray's son from before. It's not impossible he got in on his own merits, just a bit hard to believe considering he doesn't have experience with any real program languages at this point, and he doesn't have any degrees or certificates. Okay, back to his LinkedIn and his job. So he held the role for 3 years and 2 months, and once again, this was his quality assurance role. One thing Jason often does is he claims all QA are developers. First, as someone that has worked QA myself, this isn't true. I'm not saying QA aren't important, but the majority of QA generally are non-technical, and only a small portion are. At most of the places I worked at, QA generally has no coding ability and are tasked with doing manual regression testing. Basically, they get a series of test cases they need to go through, and each test case has a written out set of instructions they just follow. If something doesn't match the case steps, then a bug is filed and actual developers are tasked with addressing it. So I personally wouldn't call his 3 years at this position game development experience. And if we look at the bullet points he has on his LinkedIn, besides one line, namely the design and create an automated system, there's nothing here that even remotely implies he was coding or doing any kind of development. I'm making this point since Jason often claims he was a game developer at Blizzard for 7 years, but his first 3.5 years didn't include any developer roles. Also, to address his if QA didn't do their jobs, games wouldn't be released argument, most games have music. If a musician doesn't complete the OST, a game can't be released. Does that mean they're now developers too? Just because you say something confidently in a deep voice doesn't make it true. Moving on to his next role, we have quality assurance hacks. Here he mentions he did some forensic analysis and detected threats. Also, something I'd like to note, all of his game projects listed here were coded using primarily the C++ programming language. This is a low-level programming language. This will be important a bit later in the video. As for the role, again, I wouldn't call this game development experience. This is more related to security work than game development itself. And from the bullet points, it doesn't seem like Jason was doing much coding. His next role for 6 months was test engineer. My opinions are pretty much the same as the previous role he held. Moving on, we have the next role as security engineer for 11 months. This one is interesting, same as the
Ale to też jest w ogóle w ciekawy sposób napisane, bo zobaczcie, nie ma napisane, że był jakimś szefem, że był jakimś menadżerem, że był jakimś tym leadem, a za każdym razem ono jest zapisane, że on mentorował i przewodził całemu zespołowi profesjonalistów, no nie? Czajcie to? To jest pojebane.
Previous role he held. Moving on, we have the next role as security engineer for 11 months. This one is interesting. Since the bullet points here notes he
Typ po 3 latach pracowania w QA był szefem działu, nie?
managed web application security. For those that don't know what web applications are, it means he was working on websites and not games. There's no mention of programming here or what tools and languages he used. But regardless, this is without a doubt a non-game development role and doesn't have any overlap with game development. Okay, next up, he moves to another security engineer role for 3 months. Again, same opinions as his last job. Now, his last role at Blizzard was a red team member. Red team is a common IT term that just means someone inside the company that attempts to hack into their systems, either digital or physical. So Red Hats basically try to make hacks and show how they got access. So these vulnerabilities and issues can be addressed before real hackers can abuse them. Now, while Red Hat is offensive security and hacking, it doesn't always mean you're programming like you see with those green terminals and pics. If we look at the bullet points Jason has listed, we can see he did exploiting physical access controls and social engineering operations. Social engineering is actually one of the most common ways hackers gain access to systems, and it doesn't have to involve any programming at all. Social engineering attacks are something like
Social engineering to jest przez wysyłanie maili listów i to jest hakowanie na poziomie skamerów z Indii, nie? Czy ja coś pierdolę?
the following situation. Let's say Jason in this example is a social engineer and his target is a fellow Blizzard employee with access to the game servers. He could call them or email them from a legitimate Blizzard phone number or email and say he
Maile właśnie phishingowe wysyłał.
needs their account credentials.
To nie jest hakerem. To nie było hakowanie z filmów, to bez kitu stary. Hello, madam. Please buy 10 Google gift cards, but don't use them. Don't.
Normally, you would never share live in production account
Do not
credentials,
redeem,
even if
please.
someone from your own company. But let's say Jason manages to convince the employee to hand the credentials over. Now Jason has
Please me, I am under the water.
a way to log into the system he shouldn't have access to. This is a social engineering attack. It's not technical hacking like most people think of. It's generally just being convincing enough and getting employees to hand over info or access they shouldn't be giving out. All right, with all of that, and with all those jobs, we have 6 years and 6 months at Blizzard full-time for Jason. And if we include his time as a QA intern in 2004, we basically have his 7 years of experience at Blizzard accounted for. Judging by everything he has written here, it seems as though he's never held an actual game developer position and he's never done any game development directly. All of his roles at Blizzard were either QA, website security, or social engineering, basically his hacking. It doesn't seem like he's ever touched C++, which is the industry standard language to use when doing game development. But
Ale no jak to też takie fizyczne hakowanie, no nie, bierze, to on też na przykład mógł być taką wewnętrzną wtyką w firmie, gdzie na przykład sprawdzał, jak długi język mają deweloperzy, jak dużo powiedzą, no nie? Czy ktoś się na przykład wyloguje z kompa, bo bez kitu takie rzeczy też się sprawdza w firmach. Jakieś pracowałem w korpo i kurwa byli ludzie na takich pozycjach, w sensie nikt o tym nie wiedział, ale każdy podejrzewał, kto jest konfidentem biurowym, nie? Mieliśmy taki dział, no nie, jeden, i tam 2 laski pracowały. I one chyba nie pracowały przy bezpieczeństwie generalnie i przy serwerach, tylko one dużo siedziały na kawie, gadały z ludźmi, miały takie szerokie nicie socjalne. I my od razu wyczailiśmy, że to są konfidenci biurowi, no nie? I to wiesz, sprawdzasz takie rzeczy, czy na przykład ktoś nie używa dostępu, gdzie nie może, czy ktoś do konkretnego pokoju nie wpuszcza ludzi, których nie może, no nie? To są takie rzeczy w korpo. Ja w takim korpo pracowałem, nie?
before I finish my thoughts on this, let's check out one more job after
są też
Blizzard.
rzeczy, które się
After Blizzard,
sprawdza.
Jason worked at Amazon Games for 8 months as an automation engineer. Again, he wasn't a game developer here. He also didn't include much information under his bullet points. He did documentation of vulnerabilities and did some automation work with Python. This is the first officially recorded line that actually shows he did some programming. Python is what we call a high-level language, meaning the language is designed to be easy for humans to read and understand as well as to write. Python is a wonderful language, and I'm not throwing any shade at it, but Python is not a language used to create games. Technically, yes, you can code games in Python. Big drawback is it's an incredibly slow language. This is why the industry standard language for game development is C++, a low-level language that allows for incredible performance. The trade-off is it's a significantly more difficult language to work with. The reason I went through his job history so far and his programming language list is because Jason often claims he's a 20-year veteran
Jak się złapie
of the
takiego
game.
konfidenta, to jest zwolniany. Mój kumpel w firmie dostał kiedyś karę od firmy, wiecie za co? Że Przychodził ze swoją narzeczoną, weszli do firmy, mieliśmy takie opaski, gdzie każdy mógł wchodzić tylko do konkretnych pokoi i na wejściu też przychodziło się przez taką bramkę jak w metrze, no nie? Bo bardzo mocno ta firma dbała o bezpieczeństwo. I mój kumpel dostał kiedyś karę, bo wchodził z narzeczoną, którą oboje pracowali w firmie i miała do tego samego dostęp. I jej nie zadziałała opaska i zamiast zadzwonić do ochrony i poprosić o przydzielenie jej jednodniowej opaski do momentu naprawienia starej i zaprogramowania, no nie? To wszedł, nie działała jej opaska i jej otworzył bramkę swoją. I ona weszła do firmy, żeby pracować za pomocą opaski swojego narzeczonego. I dostał za to na przykład karę, no nie? No to takie rzeczy się dzieją w takich korpo przecież, no nie? Także wyobraźcie sobie w takim Blizzardzie, w którym faktycznie rzeczy mogą, no nie powinny wychodzić na zewnątrz, no to też się sprawdza takie rzeczy, no tym się zajmują tacy biurowi konfidenci.
Dev industry, and he was a game developer at Blizzard for 7 years, and he uses these claims to make himself seem like an authority and expert on game development and game-related topics, namely stop killing games. But from the looks of it, and in my opinion, it doesn't seem to me he's ever worked as an actual game developer within the industry, and it doesn't seem like he's ever done much program work in the industry either. I'm not throwing shade at any of the jobs listed here so far. I'm just trying to be absolutely clear that none of this, in my opinion, as someone that has worked on game engines and done game development, none of this counts as game development experience, with a lot of his roles having absolutely nothing to do with game development itself at all. To help make this clear,
Wiecie, jak w takim korpo można to na przykład ciekawie używać? Ja miałem szefa mojego działu, który był idiotą, nie? I zapominał się wylogowywać z peceta. No temu zawsze odpalałem jakieś, wiesz, na przykład filmy z gejami na kompie i czas pracy mu mierzył, że w trakcie swojego posiedzenia w biurze oglądał takie rzeczy i nigdy nie mógł mnie za to zgłosić, bo wyszłoby, że się nie wylogował z kompa. Czajcie? Taki Mind Gamesy to były. I on wiedział, że ktoś to zrobił z naszego... A nie było dużo osób. I podejrzenia, no, padały na mnie. Ale no jakby zgłosił, że ja mu coś takiego zrobiłem, no to by wyszło, że nie dbał o bezpieczeństwo i by dostał karę za to.
here's another example to help everyone understand. It's like someone working at a hospital and doing payroll work, but because they're at a hospital, they claim to be a qualified doctor. It doesn't make any sense. Jason is making a giant leap with his "I'm a game developer for 7 years at Blizzard" claims. Anyways, let's go back to his LinkedIn and see what's next. Here we have that he was a cybersecurity specialist at Eagle Research Group. Based on Jason's stories, this should be when and where he was technically working for the government. There isn't a whole lot of information here, and with most of the bullet points being extremely generic. Since he claims this was government-related work, I think it's perfectly reasonable to assume he has NDAs or he might not be able to give any specifics related to his work here.
And then,
Ej, nie oszukujmy się, coś takiego to jest w stanie sobie każdy wpisać, nie?
when I did that, I went to the United States Department of Energy and I hacked power plants for the federal government.
Jason makes a lot of claims being a hacker and has told a lot of stories, but
Ale myślicie, że też hakował i dzwonił do starych bab, żeby mu podały numer konta? Ej, a jak pracujecie na słuchawce i namawiacie stare baby, żeby przyszły na pokaz garnków, to co, jesteście hakerami? To jest na tym poziomie.
could never find anything to back up his hacking claims. So far, the only thing I found was he did do some social engineering attacks at Blizzard. Now, some of you might know about his DEF CON stories and his Mr. Robot claims. I'll probably cover those in a separate video. The reason is all of his DEF CON wins were done in teams of 10 people, never solo. And for his other hacking claims, there's only stories to go off of. To keep this video from being too long and off topic, I'll save his hacking claims for its own thing. Okay, his next set of experience is at his own company, also named PirateSoftware. But before we touch on that, let's talk about his more recent job experience at Off-Brand Games first, as that's a smaller topic to cover. Off-Brand Games is a game publishing company founded by Ludwig and Jason. I'm not entirely sure if Jason is a co-founder or not. Jason claims he isn't, but most posts and Ludwig's posts talking about the company seem to imply he is. Whether or not he's a co-founder isn't too important. Jason's role at the company is Director of Strategy. From Jason's comments on the matter, he basically helps indie game developers negotiate contracts. Again, no direct game development work here. Also, fun fact, the very first game Off-Brand Games was co-publishing was Rivals of Ether 2. A game by the developer's own words was built this time around as a more live service game. Really makes you think why you might not want Stop Killing Games to succeed. Also, don't throw any hate at Rivals of Ether 2. They actually do have an end-of-life plan to keep the game playable and alive for the community after it ends. The same goes for the rest of the off-brand published games. Don't throw them any hate. Okay, we're gonna take just one more detour before we get to the Pirate Software company. Let's check out Jason's GitHub and see if there's any code for us to review there. For those of you that don't know what GitHub is, it's basically the site where developers store their code bases and development teams can work together on a code base. In Jason's case, his code bases would be tied to his games. Okay, so here's Jason's GitHub account. And and he has 0 public projects on his account, and 0 activity for the year of 2025. Okay, the no public repos doesn't exactly prove anything, and you don't need to have public repos, but most active developers do have something at least. Also, let me point out, GitHub does have an option of having private repos, which are code bases not viewable by users not part of the team. But GitHub also has the option to show activity on private repos on your profile without leaking any private repo data. Again, this doesn't prove anything, but it's incredibly odd to see a self-proclaimed developer and hacker have 0 public code on his GitHub and 0 activity on his account. Let's try 2024, and there's nothing. Okay, 2023, oh, I see some activity, and it's bug reports. He has made 4 bug reports and some feature requests, 0 coding to review for 2023. Okay, let's try 2022. All right, I see 2 green dots. And again, it's 2 bug reports, no code to check over. All right, 2021, I'm feeling lucky, and there's nothing. Okay, 2020, he's applying to be a part of the live coders list. All right, last year to check, 2019, and his only activity is he joined January 13, 2019. Man, that was disappointing. Over 7 years of having a GitHub account, he seems to have done 0 public coding, with a grand total of 6 bug reports. Again, this doesn't prove anything too much, but most professional developers and hackers generally have something on their accounts, even if it's just super minor stuff like their settings for their favorite text editor or application. Jason could have a separate personal account where he does all his work, but the entire thing is just incredibly strange and unusual. Just about every tech YouTuber and streamer has a GitHub account with some random projects scattered around. Anyways, finally with all those positions and GitHub stuff out of the way, let's finally get to PirateSoftware, the company, and Jason's actual game development start. Let's take a look at his game dev skills, his game dev execution. With all his bragging, I'm sure this is going to be an incredible story with no issues at all. Alright, so his first game his studio published was a game called Champions of Breakfast. This was a game roughly built in 8 months in the Game Maker engine. This was the first game that Jason claimed had the unpiratable DRM, where basically the game's Steam achievements acted as a save file. I'll touch on all these points again in just a bit, keep them in mind, while I move to his next and only other game, Heartbound. So Heartbound is the big game PirateSoftware is known for, and it has a crazy development history. So according to the wiki, Heartbound's first build was October 7th, 2015. Again, this game was also made in Game Maker. It's a 2D game that's mostly story-driven with extreme similarities to Undertale, and is supposed to have 5 acts or chapters in total. A Kickstarter for the game was launched on February 24th, 2017, roughly a year and a half after work originally started on it. The original goal was to have the game finished and released by December 2017, but shortly after the launch, it was claimed the game was to be fully complete and released in early to mid 2018. A few months later, the goal was once again changed and now was targeting early access on Steam in December 2018. The game did land on Steam in December of 2018. In early access, this release contained a Chapter 1 that was complete, with a basically near fully done Chapter 2. Gee, I hope this doesn't become a trend with delays, failed promises, and shifts in goals. Surely Jason will complete this game in a few more years, right? At the very start of January 2019, they released a patch where in the patch notes it said Animus, the name of Chapter 3, was being developed. And this is where everything started truly going to hell. Now, we have a few things we should note here. This is technically the 3rd year of development if we're going off the October 2015 first build date. If we compare this to Undertale, Undertale completed development in 2 years, 7 months, with Toby Fox doing most of the development solo, with some help from Tammy Chang on art. Also, let's just take a quick look at the How Long to Beat site and see how much content Undertale has. Okay, the main story is 7 hours. With side content, it's roughly 11 hours. A completionist run is 20.5 hours. Okay, pretty good and respectable times for an indie game built in 2 years, 7 months. Heartbound, as of 2025, is still in active development. So let's take a look at how much content time they have. Alright, the main story is 2.5 hours. With side content, it's 3 hours. And a completionist run is 3.5 hours. The PirateSoftware team has been working on this game for 10 years, currently more than 3 times as long as the Undertale team. And the PirateSoftware team has 1 additional team member. Yeah, just think about that for a moment. Anyways, let's start diving through 2019 and Chapter 3 Animus development. For most of 2019, it seems like there was steady progress on Chapter 3 with various patches over the year. So far saying additional content was added. On October 2019, Jason tweeted that roughly 86% of Chapter 3 has now been completed. Then 2 years later, Jason tweets that Chapter 3 is now 92% done. So over 2 years, he made 8% progress on 1 chapter. 20 years of game dev industry experience, people, and 7 years working at Blizzard. Okay, let's rewind and go back to 2020 and see the Twitch statistics and see what was happening. Okay, the start of 2020 up till March seems like a normal stream schedule. Seems like he caught a cold on March 10th. Then after 9 days, he goes to urgent care and is diagnosed with pneumonia and gets a COVID test. Then we move to March 21st and COVID test results come back and it's negative. No COVID, just pneumonia. Wait, never mind. March 24th, Jason goes back to urgent care. Pneumonia was incorrectly diagnosed and he actually has severe bronchitis. Alright, March 30th, he's still sick, but once again confirms negative for COVID. This is really important. Alright, a few days later, April 10th, and his cold status is defeated and we're good to go. I know I'm being semi-joking in this section, but I generally don't wish Jason any health issues. Alright, so then we move on to April 11, 2020, and work on Heartbound has restarted. Work is continuing over the next few days. According to tweets, most of April was good, so was most of May 2020.
Czemu się nikt tym wcześniej nie zaczął interesować, jak on z furasami był powiązany?
We're still working on Heartbound at this point. Again, nearly all of the May prog is on Heartbound. Then we skip all the way over to July 2020, and work on Heartbound is still progressing. Seemed like there's some trouble during September, October, and November, with December being fine, and so is January of 2021 being fine. Then we hit February 2021, and then he tweets out he has had COVID for 9 months since the start of February of 2020. Wait, what? Jason was only sick in March according to his own tweets at that time period. And there's work from February from earlier. And there's proof he worked during April, May, June, July, and August at the very least, judging by his Twitch stats and his Steam announcements and patches for the game. It seems the only major slowdown of streams and work was 3 months of September, October, and November. Where he lost 9 months of time and had to stop development based on his tweets, I have no idea. I mean, it's not like he's going to change his story after this, right? Oh wait, there's this old tweet from November 2020 where Jason says he was recovering for nearly 8 months and couldn't daily stream or work. Let's look at the Twitch stats graph again and his tweets. He couldn't work during this period, but everything he posts during this time says he was working on Heartbound, and his Twitch stats confirm it. So does Steam. I mean, Jason wouldn't lie and change his story and opinions randomly, right? Especially not to his loyal viewers and Heartbound fans. Let's skim the graphs and see what else we can see. Okay, 2021 minus the months of March, April, May, and June. His streaming is extremely good and consistent, with tons of stream days going past 10 hours and some days hitting 16 hours. 2020, about the same for March, April, May, and June, and September, with the rest of the months being slightly less consistent, but still more consistent than not. Then we get to 2023, and this is incredibly consistent with the stream averages being 6 to 8 hours per day. Let's start diving back into Jason's tweets. So on June 2023, he catches COVID again. Okay, that seems to match up with his Twitch stats graph. Here there's a clear week gone. Let's see what Jason says in July.
That was a hell of a thing. That's the second time I've gotten COVID. The first time took 9 months to recover. This one took probably about, I think it was in total about 20 days. So
there's no point in time in 2020, 2021, 2022, or 2023 where he lost 9 months consecutively or stopped development for that period of time. He also in the clip claimed he got COVID twice in total. So that doesn't explain why there's 4 sections of gaps
Ty, dobre historyki
on development,
powymyślał.
since all these gaps are months apart and he only had COVID twice. Let's skip ahead to June 2024 and see what he says about these 4 years of development.
how long have you been working in this game? Was the coding a solo job? Yeah. Nobody else has touched the code base for Heartbound ever except for me. It's just me. I've been working on it for about 7 years, but I lost 2.5 years to COVID.
Okay, I hope at this point you realize his
2,5 na COVID stracił. Nieźle.
excuses for not working on Heartbound and his tweets are filled with complete BS. Once again, he stopped development in 2020, 3 months between September to October, where he had his first COVID period of inactivity. His second COVID was in June 2023. No matter how you try to arrange this and make sense of it, the numbers don't work out. Especially since we can see his 2023, he basically had a perfect stream schedule. And if we look at 2021 and 2022, there were only 2 gaps where he seems to be affected and they're months apart. Jason basically just decided to quit working on his game sometime during 2020 and has been making random excuses since then on why he hasn't made progress. Chapter 3 Animus, the reason we've been going through this chart started all the way back in January of 2019. If we look at the latest patch in 2025, work on Chapter 3 Animus is still going somehow. We have gone through 6 years of development so far, and Jason hasn't been able to complete 14% of Chapter 3. Seriously, what the hell? Remember, Undertale took 2 years, 7 months to finish the full entire game with 3 times as much content as what Heartbound is currently delivering in 2025, with 10 years of development time under its belt. To put this into even more perspective, let's look at Yandere Dev, a developer notorious for having no clue what he's doing programming-wise, and spends the majority of his day responding to emails and maybe spending a few minutes each day working on his game. He makes more progress and more consistently than Jason does. Seriously, I'm not joking. Here's the updated list for Yandere Dev starting in 2020. Yandere Dev has made more progress and more consistently in that year alone than Jason has in the last 5. We just might be living in a timeline where Yandere Dev finishes his game before
Nie może po prostu powiedzieć, że chuj, wybrałem karierę streamera i
Jason
tyle.
does. And yes, I might have gone slightly crazy trying to plot 6 years of Animus development with conflicting tweets and time gaps.
Nie wiem, kurwa, nie czaję. Dziwna historia PirateSoftware'a. W sensie, no, sytuacja jest taka, że to trochę było już widoczne wcześniej, nie? Ale dobra, ja muszę to zobaczyć, to mnie ciekawi. Z PirateSoftware'em.
Because literally anything would be better than this. What is up, guys? Coding Jesus here. Guys, today we will be doing a code review of a popular YouTuber and streamer by the name of Thor
Pewnie
or
chcecie
Pirate
napisy,
Software.
nie?
Now, why should you care, and who the hell is Thor? Well, Thor has been the talk of the town as of recently, as he's been an extremely large streamer that has come out against a pro-consumer movement in the gaming space called Stop Killing Games. Stop Killing Games is an initiative launched by a man named Ross Scott, who is an advocate for consumers in the video game space. The purpose of Stop Killing Games is to prevent publishers from revoking access of games from people who have paid to play those games. There are plenty of examples out there of publishers that produce games that require online access to play, but once they pull the plug from their servers, consumers now stop having access to those games. The Stop Killing Games movement is looking to advocate on behalf of consumers in order to mandate that game publishers and game developers have some sort of end-of-life plan for games such that they can continue to be played after the developer would like to. To me, that makes total sense. It doesn't sound fair and isn't right for you to be sold a game as a good, but for it to effectively be a service with an unknown expiration date that the company can not support at any time. Now, why am I picking on Thor here in particular? Well, Thor has not only what appears to be lied about his experience, or at the very minimum played it off as something that it's really not, but he's also misrepresented the initiative and has doubled and tripled down in that misrepresentation.
If you're going to be putting forward something that you want to start a conversation to eventually become legislation, and these are the reasons for it, but I can't agree with you, and I won't agree with Ross. There's no way around that. I think this is gross. To sum it all up, no, I will not be supporting the initiative Stop Killing Games.
Cryptically wishing for the movement to fail.
So I'm going to be honest with you. I hope that your initiative gets everything you asked for, but nothing you wanted.
I don't know why you do that, but he decided to do so. He doesn't even have to agree with the movement. He just needs to admit that he misrepresented it. Now, other creators have reviewed this drama to no end and have gone over his employment history and timeline. But what I want to do that I guess would make this video unique is go over his actual code from his developer live streams and analyze whether this guy has the skills that he claims he has as a 20-year veteran and game developer working for Blizzard and other game publishers, etc.
My name is Jason Thor Hall, also known as Pirate Software Online. I've been in the gaming industry for about 20 years. I used to work at Blizzard Entertainment, then Amazon Game Studios, and now I own my own studio, Pirate Software, by the same name, which is an indie studio. And I've been
Ile Pirate Software ma lat, że on ma 21 lat doświadczenia w gamingu?
Now, why should you guys listen to me about any of this? Well, I'm a C++ developer with 5 years of experience in the quantitative trading space. I've read dozens of books on C++ and over half a dozen books just on C++ design, from influencers in the space to professors to people that also have YouTube channels to time-tested and trusted books. I've read a lot, and while I'm not an authority in C++, I'm pretty likely to be somebody that can suss out a bad practice if I see one. At least I hope. I also have a bunch of open source contributions in C++ on projects that I find interesting, like Monero. Now, when I was making notes for this video, because I like to come prepared, I thought I need to go through dozens of different developer streams. But what I found out really quickly is that I can only find 2 developer streams that Thor actually brings up code on the screen in, and in those developer streams, he does not actually do any coding. The code is just visually there on the screen, and 98% of the actual stream is him looking at his subscribers, looking at his tip jar as to how much money people have sent him, and also looking at videos about games, but never actually doing any game development in a dev stream. Without further ado, let's actually take a look at some of his code. Alright, so I'm going to be linking these VODs in the description box below. I recommend people actually download these VODs before he takes them down, because honestly, if I was claiming I'm a game developer with 20 years of experience, this would be embarrassing to have online. Let's take a look at what's really wrong about this, and I don't even need to be a game dev to understand that. When you look at the code here, what do you see? You see a lot of magic numbers. That's an industry term for numbers that don't have any description or explanation as to what they are or why they exist. And you also have a lot of true or false, which is not descriptive at all. When you look at any function call as another developer, you should understand what's going on without needing to read through the implementation of the actual method itself. So part type sprite, part type size, I don't need to read through that to understand what's being passed to it and what it's doing. But that's not what's going on here. I shouldn't need to ask myself, what is this number 1? What is the 0? What does it signify? Right? Imagine we have a car object, and I create the car object by passing in 96, 4, false, false. Do you have any idea about what those numbers mean? How I'm initializing that car? You don't. A step above that, a better alternative would be to specify in words what 96 means. For example, unsigned 32-bit integer horsepower equals 96. Number of doors equals 4. Is automatic equals false. Is electric equals false. And then pass that into the construction of car. That is the bare minimum. That's what I would expect out of
Kod, na który jak ktokolwiek popatrzy, to jest w ogóle niewynikowy. Nie idzie go odtworzyć, zedytować, sprawdzić, tylko by trzeba było metodą prób i błędów wziąć, zmienić 1 na 2, włączyć silnik i zobaczyć, co się zmieniło. A to czasem znalezienie tego, co się zmieniło, mogłoby trwać w chuj.
intern that's fresh out of school. Taking that a step further, you can implement a concept called strong typing, which is the most expressive form of instantiation. What we can do in that case is define an alias at the bare minimum or a class, and we can call it horsepower. And then we can create an enumeration for things like transmission or fuel. And then we'd alter the car's constructor and pass in that information. Horsepower 98, door number 4, transmission automatic, fuel gasoline. You don't need to be a game developer to know that that's a lot more maintainable than whatever Thora
No
has
dobra,
here.
na przykład jest szansa, że ma taką dokumentację, w której ma napisane,
Another really good example.
że jeżeli pojawia się part type live, to pierwsza liczba oznacza coś i druga liczba też oznacza coś i wtedy na podstawie tego się do tego
That is at
dochodzi.
2556. So if we jump there, okay, right here. Alarm 0, alarm 1, alarm 2. What is that? What are those alarms? Is it an alarm for
Samo
a
to, że
person
masz
A,
taką dokumentację, to już jest złe. Aha, czyli to jest zły nawyk, okej.
an alarm for whatever character, an alarm to do what? It's
Nie,
unexpressive.
się nie znam na
It's
kodowaniu w ogóle.
really spaghetti code, in my opinion. Okay, let's go to around 1 hour and 4 minutes. This is also a complete mess for a couple of reasons. First of all, Thor is using the incorrect data types. This isn't even getting to some sort of advanced design or design pattern. It's showing a complete lack of understanding how to represent information in a program. Okay? What do I mean by that? Well, look at question asked equals 0. Question asked, in my opinion, is true or false. Has this question been asked? It should be a Boolean data type. What does 0 mean? Booleans are represented as integers under the hood. So in C++, anything that isn't 0 is true. So 1 is true. But why would you even give another developer the option to write question asked equals 42? In theory, that should be true because anything other than 0 is true. But why even allow somebody to write code that can potentially be that confusing? It's just a no-go. Another thing here that I noticed is the absurd amount of comments. Most of the time, you don't need to write comments in your code. That's because your code should be self-documenting. But there is a 1 to 5% case rate in which you should be writing comments only if your code is extremely complex. And that's not the case here. This is a simple if statement and a simple switch statement. You don't need to add comments here. Having a comment for we have asked the question and question asks equals 1 is totally superfluous, a waste of time, a waste of space. I'm not sure why it was added, if not just to waste time on a dev stream, to spend more time pretending you're coding than watching videos. Okay, let's take a look at his second stream because the rest of this stream is reviewing other games, looking at his subscription count. I don't know why he gets so horny looking at this. Watching video games, etc. You guys get the point. Storyline array number. Oh my god. Here he appears to be storing a timeline of events in a flat one-dimensional array with random numbers as the indices in order to represent said event. So literally anything would be an upgrade over what is written here. For example, what he could have done is created a nested structure where all those default values, instead of being hard-coded and written in some file, can simply be stored in a YAML or configuration file that could be edited outside of the build as to not waste time rebuilding the entire application. in a YAML or XML format. That's development 101. You learn it in the first week of your new job as either an intern or a junior developer. What's even worse is he now also needs to remember what 419 means. So somewhere in his code, he needs to actually add a comment or something to represent what a 419 is. As you can see here, I found the file that contains all these events, which are the association between
To jest każda liczba zupełnie inne wydarzenie w grze reprezentuje i trzeba byłoby coś takiego przejść, żeby wiedzieć, co robi, a tam było 419.
a magic number in some state. It's very obvious that this can get very unwieldy extremely quickly. As you can see here, he has some number associated with 0, 1, or even 2, and then he needs to detail in a comment what that means. Now, imagine a developer accidentally puts 2 here or 3. Finding, tracking, and solving that bug is really going to be a development nightmare. What if you forget to type 3 here and accidentally type 2 and start associating coffee cold knowledge with floor 2 coffee age? Or even worse, in your code somewhere, instead of typing 213, you type 214 and now need to go back and track why your game is misbehaving. This is extremely poor practice and can get very messy very quickly. Not only that, but this is going to significantly decrease the velocity of your development because you're going to need to jump between the storyline vars file, find the event you want to reference somewhere else in code, and go back to that line that you'd like to reference the event in. So you're going to constantly need to be jumping between files, forgetting, potentially mistyping, and it's just a recipe for disaster. When it comes to the nested structure though, tell me what you think is better. What Thor has here, or what I have on screen, which in my opinion is much more expressive. Now this goes beyond simply liking code better. What I have on screen is objectively better because it makes it harder for you and others to make mistakes, and it's a lot clearer as to what's going on.
Kurwa,
I don't even
nie
need
wiem,
you
miałem
and-
takie wrażenie, że z kodem jest tak, że jak jest dobrze napisany, to nie musisz rozumieć kodowania i rozumiesz ten kod, no nie? A tu masz odwołania do liczb, gdzie stary musisz szukać, co robi 419, żeby zrozumieć, nie?
others to make mistakes, and it's a lot clearer as to what's going on. I don't even need to know how this game is designed.
No dawaj Loanel na tego. Na Discorda, no. Dawaj, jestem na Stream Voice.
To understand that whatever he's doing here is not optimal.
Halo, cześć.
No
I
siema.
also don't need to
Może tak zacznę, tak, to co ten gość tłumaczy w tym filmie, to są takie absolutne podstawy tego, jak pracujesz jako programista. Bo ja tak powiedzieć, programista to nie jest człowiek, który lubi się męczyć, no nie?
No.
W sensie, wszystkie te praktyki, które mamy wymyślone w tej robocie są głównie po to, żebyś mógł dosyć leniwie podejść do tego, co robisz. Czyli na przykład nie robisz czegoś takiego, że wypisujesz jakoś na pamięć rzeczy po to, żeby potem pamiętać, gdzie coś było, albo potrzebujesz mieć zrobione 40 różnych dokumentów, które ci tłumaczą, co każda linia kodu ma robić, tylko wszystko, co robisz w tym kodzie, robisz tak, żeby to było jak najbardziej zrozumiałe tam, gdzie to jest napisane, no nie?
No.
Jak widzisz coś takiego, jak ten gość, co tutaj ma, że on ma zrobione jakieś, jak było to pierwsze z tymi tabelami, no nie, że wpisane ma te cyfry,
No.
to jest koszmar. Coś takiego absolutnie nigdy mi nie poszło na jakąkolwiek produkcję jakiegokolwiek sensownego programu, który robisz jakoś komercyjnie. No, to najprościej jest to wytłumaczyć tak. Nawet jak robisz samemu coś sobie prywatnie, no, możesz nie być game developerem, możesz nie znać jakoś na standardach, żeby to jakoś robić, ale tak po prostu na zrozumienie, jak piszesz coś teraz
To
i
zapomnisz
potem
to
wrócisz
za
do tego
2
za
tygodnie,
miesiąc,
No. To chcesz wiedzieć, co to znaczy,
to-
gdzie to jest, nie?
skąd masz pamiętać, co tutaj robiłeś miesiąc temu? To jest tak, jakbyś pracował sam ze sobą, tylko miesiąc w przód, no nie? Więc ty w przyszłości chcesz sobie zrobić, żeby było łatwiej, no nie? Bo nie chcesz się męczyć.
No.
A to, co jest tutaj zrobione, no nie dziwi to, że 8 lat goś robi tą grę, jak za każdym razem wraca do developmentu, ma taką tablicę i skąd on ma pamiętać, co tam było zrobione, no nie?
Mhm.
To jest taki mask off. Ja rozumiem, nie, tak jak jest ten Toby Fox od Deltarune, no nie, że
Mhm.
no on jest prywatny, no powiedzmy, że jest amatorem, no wydał grę, no on nie jest amatorem, zarobił już pieniądze, no nie, ale nie jest jakby wykwalifikowanym jakimś, nie wiem, inżynierem czy coś takiego, albo nie skolił się jakoś nie wiadomo ile. No to wiadomo, że on nie będzie miał w kodzie nie wiadomo czego. No ale jak wychodzisz na internet, chwalisz się, że jesteś jakimś kurwa hakerem, z przeproszeniem, i potem jeszcze mówisz, że pracowałeś 8 lat w Blizzardzie i jaki to nie jesteś super i robisz porady ludziom, a potem ktoś ci robi code review i jest coś takiego, no to jest... No,
No.
Aż mnie to
recommend the most optimal
denerwuje mnie
structure.
jako kogoś, kto, no dobra, no jestem profesjonalnym
Because
programistą,
literally
pracuję jako
anything would be
programista. No, nie? Jak widzę coś takiego, to aż mnie, kurczę, mierzi.
No.
Że gość
Another thing that's
na
really,
internecie
really
się tak-
weird
A,
is
szkoda
that
gadać.
he's using these numbers to
To jest
represent
Gramy
dobrze
w Dotę
wytłumaczone.
zaraz.
and
Nie,
now
ale-
everywhere he
możemy
writes the
zagrać,
number
no.
one and
Ale
when it represents
mówię
a
ci,
person,
to jest po
he
prostu
needs to
taki
remember that it's
maskow. Jak
Shelley,
ktoś jest
which is
programistą i
presumably
widzi
a
coś
game
takiego,
character.
tego gościa, jak on się tak...
Imagine
Każdy film
removing
zaczyna.
all these comments.
By the way, I worked at Blizzard
Would
and I hacked for the, nie wiem, for the government, coś takiego, no nie?
No.
Gość pewnie wysyła jakieś maile z phishingiem, żeby łapać jakichś kurwa tych stażystów,
As a
żeby
newly
wchodzili na jakieś
added
linki
game
ze
developer
zmienionym,
to
nie
this
wiem,
game project,
jedną
have
literówką
any
i
idea
mówi,
that one
że
is Shelley?
on był hakerem dla
You would have
rządu,
no
nie?
idea.
Że,
This would never
Szkoda
ever be
gadać.
allowed in a production
krótki
repository.
rant.
And I've been hinting, it's below what you'd expect of a bottom tier intern. One way to improve
To jest właśnie ciekawe, no, bo ten devstream on ponad rok i nikt wcześniej, nie? Tego nie zauważył, jakie to
this
są.
is to write case and then switch on an enumeration. So case character Shelley. That is way better to whatever he has here.
To tam jest jeszcze później,
Another
że on mu
example is at
odpowiedział, no nie? Że jeszcze
159.
nie wiem, czy będziesz chciał to oglądać
War Magic
potem, ale tam
numbers,
jest kontynuacja
32.
tego.
What does
Że
message
ten gość
32
mu,
mean?
ten
What
Pirate
does message
Software
65
odpowiedział mu
mean?
jakimś
No.
bullshitem totalnym i on nagrał drugi film i drugi raz go wyjaśnił.
What does message
Kurwa, ja
ten
to
kod
szeruję,
Indius.
dawaj, obejrzymy to.
97 mean? And what are these dialogue options 2, 5, 6, 0? This is a culmination of my past couple of comments. All in one
Ja nawet nie
steaming
pracuję w tej
pile of-
technologii, w której ten kod jest
Surprisingly,
zrobiony. To
that is
nie,
all
nie
the
musisz być
code that I
wyćwiczony
can
tam w C++,
find in these
żeby
game
wiedzieć, jak to
developer
powinno być
streams.
zrobione.
This is the game
To
I
jest-
work on. It's called Hardbound. Now understand something. Before I send you this link, do not buy my game.
No, to jest drugie, tak?
No
Patrzę
drugi
na
film
to.
chyba u niego tam z rzędu.
What is up, guys? Coding Jesus here. Guys, in today's video, I want to review the top contentions that not only Pirate Software had, but a lot of his fanboys had with my video yesterday, in which I reviewed the code that he wrote for his game Heartbound. Now, while the video was a stunning success in terms of engagement, there was a couple of themes that kept repeating from detractors that I think are worth addressing in a separate video. So let's get into it. The first claim that I saw time and time again is that your code quality shouldn't matter if you're a solo game dev, and that code quality only somehow matters if you work in a team. Now, you'd think that if you're working on a passion project, you'd be interested in holding yourself to the highest possible standard, since you can make your own decisions, free of any corporate timeline, and not subject to demands of other employees. You know, they say this with such confidence, as if poor code is not going to hold you back in your own development process and you're somehow impervious to the effects of your poor decisions as long as you make those bad decisions yourself. Usually when you work with a team, you can get away with poorer code because you won't need to deal with the consequences of that code as you pawn it off to somebody else and work on something totally separate. But as a solo developer, you need to deal with and contend directly with all the trade-offs that you make as you make those decisions while you code your game or your project or your whatever. In other words,
Logiczne się to
every
wydaje.
decision you
No
make
tak, to
will
jest-
either
to-
make life
Że
easier
chcesz
Generalnie
robić
biorąc
jak
wszystkie
najlepiej od
praktyki-
samego początku i
Tak,
mieć takie
wszystkie
praktyki.
praktyki, które my stosujemy jako programiści, one są bardzo logiczne. Ich celem jest, dwa cele są, żeby się mniej narobić i drugi cel jest taki, że jak ktoś popełni błąd, żeby było jak najprościej go wykryć.
No.
To są
Bear
dwa
the entire
podstawowe
burden
cele
of
tych
that
rzeczy, które my
debt,
tam robimy, że
which
nie
slows
duplikujemy
down
kodu,
development.
że mamy te
Now,
nazewnictwa
for
i
those
takie
of you
tam
who
rzeczy.
aren't
No nie?
technical,
To nie jest jakiś rocket
technical
science,
debt
że to
is a
jest
term
wymyślone, tylko to
refers to
naprawdę
the
jest tak
extra
no,
work you're going to need to put
logicznie
in
wymyślone.
down the line because you currently made a decision that was not ideal. So you are delivering something faster today only to slow down future delivery tomorrow, the day after, the week after, the month after, etc. It's kind of like a ball and chain that's tied around your leg, and every step you take forward, that ball grows and grows and grows, which decreases the velocity of your development. Now, the fact that Heartbound has taken over 8 years to development and is still in early access, despite the fact that the game took inspiration from Undertale, which took less time to make and provided more content, is a reflection of the fact that code quality is important and it will stifle your development if you do not take it seriously. And it's kind of ironic because the same people that are trying to make excuses for poor code are the same people that actually play the game and are expecting features to be delivered. I don't care if his code's poor in the sense that it doesn't impact me directly. Yeah, I might care from a technical perspective to try to reconcile his game development experience or his game industry experience with who he claims to be and what he produces, but I'm not going to play his game.
No, ale tak finalnie to sytuacja jest taka, że Pirate Software się kreuje na chuj wie jakiego hakera, no wychodzi, że chujowy kod pisze i
his
tyle,
game.
nie?
And the same people that
No
do
tak,
care
i
for his
no
game
właśnie o
are
to
the same
chodzi, że
people
to
that
jest,
say
to jest
that
największe to,
it's
co on
okay for
zrobił
the
teraz,
game
że
code to
on
be
mu zrobił
slopped,
ten pierwszy
when in
film
fact they're waiting
i
on
zamiast
those same
przyznać,
features
no
that
tak, to jest
require
jakiś
the
mój
game
prywatny
code to
game
be clean
development,
in
nie
order to
przyjmuje
develop
takich
and do
standardów
so quickly.
dużych. On zamiast
Now,
tego
I think
idzie w
that my
zaparte i
views
mówi,
here
że
can really be
jego zdaniem to jest
summarized
dobrze.
in
To jest największa
a
oznaka
dialogue
tego,
that
że
I
gość
had with
kompletnie nie wie, o
Quinthio
czym mówi.
when I jumped on
Jak
his stream yesterday
jest
and talked a
programista,
bit
który
more
ci
about
nie
the
potrafi się
video.
przyznać do błędu, to
The
jest
practices
największy
that he's employed
rak,
so
jaki możesz
far
spotkać, no nie? Że
are
ktoś jest tak,
practices that I'd
nie wiem,
expect
zadufany w
from
sobie, że
somebody
nie potrafi się
that
przyznać do tego, że
watched
popełni
Khan
błąd.
Academy for a
Każdy
week,
w tej robocie
not somebody
popełni
that's
prędzej
worked
czy
on a
później
project for
błąd
8 years,
i wszystkie te,
claims to,
że
you
wszystko
know,
to, co
worked
robimy
at
jest po to,
Blizzard
żeby
and been around game
zminimalizować
devs
koszt
or
tego,
at
że ten
some
błąd
certain
jest, żeby
points
potem
claim
łatwo
that he's
sobie
a
to
game
znaleźć i
dev.
naprawić, no nie?
If he just came and
A
said, this is what
on
I
tu wyraźnie
produced,
ma źle,
I
jeszcze idzie w
learned
zaparte, że jego zdaniem to jest dobrze. A mu
game
wszyscy
dev
mówią, że
for
jest źle.
1
No,
or 2 weeks,
no.
Khan Academy, I spent an hour or two every day. I'd say that's actually good progress. But to come and claim that you're some like authority in the space, you know, this is the code. Now, Pirate himself also responded, and he got a bit hung up on the fact that my mouse had some variable highlighted, despite the fact that I never talked about that variable. It's actually quite funny because I refer to every variable other than the one that he referred to in his reply. But skipping over that, he makes the claim that you can't define a Boolean in GameMaker because GameMaker itself doesn't have a native Boolean type in its scripting language. In other words, it interprets reals as Booleans. Now, to reconcile the fact that he used a Boolean in his code with what he said, I decided to do what any developer would do, and that is I consulted the documentation. So if you go to data types in GameMaker, oh, look at that. You are also provided with constants, true and false, which can always be used in your code to prevent any issues, should the native Boolean type be defined later. So
Dobra, no i
GML
tu
defines
to jest pewnie
constants.
cięższe do
Ja tego nie
zrozumienia.
rozumiem, nie?
To jest techniczny koncept, że Pirate uważał, że w tym języku, w którym pisał ten program, no czyli tą grę swoją, że on nie jest w stanie zrobić jakoś tego typu, o którym on mówi w tym pierwszym filmie, ten Cunning Jesus.
No.
I dla mnie samo to, że on już mówi, że jego zdaniem tego się nie da zrobić w tym, to już pokazuje, że on nie ma pojęcia, o co mówi. To jest, nie wierzę, że było, bo ja nie znam się na tym języku, nie wiem, co to w ogóle jest. Absolutnie mogę od razu powiedzieć, że nie wierzę w to, że nie da się tego zrobić, bo to jest tak podstawowa operacja w dowolnym języku programowania, jaki tam możesz sobie wymyślić. Może są jakieś ezoteryczne, znaczy dobra, no jakiś tam assembler, czyli taki bardzo niskopoziomowy język, no to okej, może tego by nie miał, ale jak to jest coś takiego do robienia gry komputerowe, to ja mogę w ciemno powiedzieć, że najprawdopodobniej jakoś to się da zrobić. W ogóle powiedzenie, że czegoś się nie da zrobić przy programowaniu, to jest ryzykowne stwierdzenie, tak ogólnie powiem. Zwykle coś się zawsze da zrobić, ale no, takie po prostu stwierdzenie, że nie da się, jak można wygooglować w 2 minuty, że najprawdopodobniej się da, no to też.
True as 1 and false as 0. And the documentation itself even recommends that you use true and false instead of reals in case that association between a Boolean and a real ever gets changed to a Boolean and some other native definition of a Boolean. So in other words, if they ever replace the aliasing of bools for reals with bools for actual bools, they recommend that you use true and false. But we know he's not going to concede on this point or admit the fact that he was wrong, given his track record. So let's
czyli
move on to the
generalnie
next
w ogóle dokumentacja tego programu, tak, czy czegoś takiego zaleca właśnie zrobienie tego stroju Coding Jesus i to czemu zaprzeczył
Tak,
Pirate Software?
Bo
Bo
moim
tam
zdaniem
może
musi
zmienić
to
się jakiś
zalecać.
sposób działania logicznego, tak, tego kodu.
Znaczy, no, niekoniecznie sposób działania logicznego, tylko czytelność tego kodu. No to jest bardzo ważne, żeby to było czytelne, tak tam mówi wcześniej, no nie? To jest dla mnie
Another
po
comment
prostu
that I've
wprost
seen
wydaje mi się, że to
is
jest
that
oczywiste, że to
you've
musi się
never
dać
worked
zrobić,
with
bo jakby się tego nie dało
GameMaker, so you
zrobić,
must
to
not know.
właśnie by trzeba było robić tak, jak robi Pirate Software, no nie? I że automatycznie to znaczy, że najprawdopodobniej powinno się tak da zrobić.
What you're talking about. Another equally absurd variant of this is what he's writing is not C++, or anybody who has worked with technology or more than one programming language understands that languages are just toolkits. Each toolkit is uniquely positioned to solve a given problem. Now, while there might be unique features in every toolkit, essentially there's a lot of overlap. Okay? An integer in one language is going to be very similar to an integer in another. Every language is going to have for loops, etc., etc. So, while the actual toolkit might be different, the same principles, patterns, and design decisions should apply in large part to any problem that you're trying to solve. The only difference is the tools that you use to solve that problem are going to be a little different. What does that look like in practice? Take that code snippet alarm 0 equals 0, alarm 1 equals 0, alarm 2 equals 0. You don't need to copy and paste that code every single time. I'd expect an intern or somebody learning code in Khan Academy to copy and paste. You can simply replace that all with a for loop. So what does it say about somebody that they haven't even considered to use a for loop for something as simple as this? If there's something that I regret, it's not being able to provide more substantive feedback. If you look at plenty of my other videos where I do a code review, I go into line by line the GitHub repository and break it down for my viewers, both saying what went well and what didn't go
Dokładnie
well
to, o
and how
czym
can
on
it
mówi.
be
Nawet,
improved.
możemy nawet
But
pójść jeszcze
Thor
krok
did-
dalej, no nie? Załóżmy, że to, co powiedziałem, że nie znam się i w tym języku nie dałoby się tego zrobić. To nie znaczy, że ten język, którego on używa, że nie wiem... W sensie chodzi mi o to, że jeżeli się tego nie da zrobić, to znaczy, że najprawdopodobniej w ogóle nie powinien używać tej technologii. Bo to jest coś, co się powinno dać zrobić. Tak powiem, no nie?
Give
To
me,
są
or
takie po
really
prostu
anybody
max
the chance
oczywiste
to do
rzeczy
that
dla
in
każdego
his code.
programisty.
No.
Because all he does is share snippets and screenshots. You also shouldn't be representing an entire entity made up of health, position, maybe whether they're dead or alive, their ID, their inventory, as a number or an index into some array. That's not how you present character models or entities in game design. And I don't even need to be a game developer to understand that. I just watch 1 or 2 videos of the Cherno and I already know that's the case. So hopefully you guys found this video informative or interesting. I'm going to now move on to other news. So unless anything new comes out that I think I can bring my unique perspective to, I'm going to put Pirate Software behind me and just keep moving forward. Thanks for watching this video, guys. Cheers.
No dobra. Chciałem grać w dotkę, co?